me first of all express my thanks to the organizers of this event. Very happy to be here, very honored to be invited to take part in this event and discuss with you all questions which I believe to be not just intellectually interesting but also socially and politically important, not just for the particular language groups who are going to be the focus of these 2 days, but I think for people in general, independently of what language group they associate themselves with and or they feel they belong to. So I think we're dealing with very important issues there. Even though the focus of these 2 days is very much going to be on Tibetan language and culture, I'm afraid I have no expertise on Tibetan language and culture. A long time ago, actually 30 years ago to be precise, I had some minimum exposure to Tibetan language and culture when I went to Zanskar in 1979, and that was the year after it was first opened to foreign visitors. It was a very important experience for me back then, but I cannot claim that this has resulted in any particular expertise. So don't count on me to contribute. There are here many people who are vastly more knowledgeable than I ever can be on Tibetan language and culture in its many facets. What I can try to share with you, however, is a slightly different, slightly unusual perspective on minority languages, diversity, and one of the facets of this, namely mother tongue medium education, doing this from an economic perspective. As Evelyn Young has mentioned in her very kind introduction, I come from economics, but my main area of work is the economics of language, the economics of education, the evaluation of public policy in those areas. And what I would like to do in the next 40 minutes or so is to tell you a little more about this area of research and perhaps try to show how it can help make a case in favor of linguistic diversity and make a case in favor of mother tongue medium education. I will try to speak for a bit less than the 45 minutes given to me so that we have perhaps a little more time for discussion, for questions. I'm aware that many of the instruments that I will talk about now or many of them may not be familiar to everyone, so feel free to ask questions. By the way, if during my talk itself, one particular expression is not clear, don't hesitate to just interrupt me. I think we're a small group, we can do this informally, but otherwise I'll be very happy to take any questions at the end of this presentation. So what's the starting point for today? The question is mother tongue medium education economically justified, and does it carry value? And I've put these two words in bold red type because they tend to be bandied about quite a lot, but they have very specific meaning in economic analysis. So we'll take a closer look at that. More precisely, we'll say, well, what kind of value are we talking about? What do we mean by value? How do we identify something as valuable in an economic sense? Once we've identified it, we can ask ourselves, well, how much? So from identification, we move to measurement or quantification. And then there is also policy, an important question at a policy level, namely, to what extent is the value of mother tongue medium education related to the value of linguistic diversity in general? So, these are huge questions, and as always, we have to start by circumscribing them a little bit. So I need actually 2 slides to circumscribe the issue, and it's in small print, but I hope you can read it nonetheless. First of all, I want to make it clear that I'm going to move away from the standard, well, not standard, but often deployed educational arguments in favor of mother tongue medium education. These educational arguments may be perfectly right, perfectly appropriate. However, they do not address the question of value in the economic sense. It's a different thing, and this is why I say, well, since I've been invited to talk about the economic aspects, I will therefore not talk about the educational aspects, which, by the way, many of our colleagues here in this room know much better than I do. I will also move away from the ethical/legal arguments, which can be enshrined, for example, in the concept of LHR, linguistic human rights. I mean, these ethical arguments may be perfectly right. There's no problem with that. But then they do not generally suffice to convince those who have opposing views. So in a sense, what I'm trying to do here is, what can we do to speak not to the converted, but to speak to the non-converted? So, which means we have to try another angle. And the other angle is provided by the public policy argument. And the public policy argument deals with an intervention by society on itself, on its destiny, but it very much uses economic concepts, or concepts which are very much at the heart of economic theory. And it deploys itself on two main dimensions. One is resource allocation, which we also call efficiency. There is a raft of terms there: effectiveness, cost effectiveness, efficiency. We will not get into that conceptual detail, but essentially, on the one hand, we have resource allocation, called efficiency, and the other is resource distribution, which we also call fairness. And fairness in the economic sense is not the same thing as fairness in the ethical sense or philosophical sense, right? So we'll take a closer look at this, but in this talk, and following an explicit request which I received during the exchange of emails that we had when we were arranging for me to come here, I will focus mostly on resource allocation, namely efficiency, although we will be saying a few things about fairness at the end. So, what is efficient in the economic sense? To address this, I need a second slide to circumscribe the issue. We have to distinguish between two planes, two levels, and interestingly, we were discussing this with Tove Skutnapkangas over breakfast. There are two different, conceptually very different levels at which we can address the question of, efficiency or effectiveness or cost effectiveness of linguistic diversity or cultural diversity. There is what one might call the absolute level. Is linguistic and cultural diversity good in the absolute? Implicitly, the counterfactual would be uniformity. So is diversity better than uniformity? I mean, I suppose most of us here will say, well, yes, of course. But for many people, the answer is no, of course not. So we have to be aware that out there's plenty of people who simply do not share our views in this respect. So if linguistic and cultural diversity is good, then we would ask more specifically, are the languages that make up this diversity, are they good? Do we have, therefore, if they are good, then do we have economic reasons to protect and promote them? And by way of consequence arises the question of whether we should use mother tongue medium education as a tool to do this. As opposed to this very general question, there is what I might call the contingent issue. We may agree that for whatever reason, an economic reason or political or whatever, that doesn't matter, for whatever reason, let us accept that we view linguistic diversity as good, as something good. And then we can ask ourselves economically a different question, namely, how can it be produced, quote unquote produced, at an acceptable cost or in a cost-effective manner? So see, these are two very different questions, and answering one does not automatically provide an answer to the other. And the first one is, in a sense, broader, deeper, more difficult, and we'll try to focus mostly on this one, although we will be building bridges to the other one as well. So last way in which I want to circumscribe the issue addressed in this talk is that I will try and focus on the general question of the value of languages or linguistic diversity before moving on to the implications that this might have for mother tongue medium education.